Sorry? I don't think so. Unless you felt like you could give me a cuddle or something like that. Yeah. No.
Does this make you feel more loved if they're up close down, or do you want them out of the
No, I'm easy either way.
out of the stick way?
Let's share the love.
Share love.
Now let me see. Can I'm going to drive this way.
Boys and girls.
I probably better have one too, real one at the moment. Oh, if this is free to take, go for it. No. Yes. Yes.
I would, you know. You got a gym?
I can be jamming, that's fine.
That's with average.
That's fine. Oh, that's right, I'll roll with that, it's fine. It's unnecessarily complex then. Oh, I've got them here. Sorry, I've got them. Yeah, might make a start. Okay, we'll haul them in and then we'll make a start.
More boys. We'll get another table, eh? Get another table.
What? You're going to listen carefully. Hey, listen. You have to look carefully. Yeah, they're the only. No, they're the only famous you have to look. Famous scientists, you have to look. There's something interesting for you to look at in every single one of the scientists, but just for you, okay? All right, everybody, let's make a start. So, grab a seat. Very glad we've got Uncle Sam tonight, who can make sure no one else comes in from this point, bar the doors. All right. Let's start by praying to the God who we're going to talk about tonight. So, let's pray. Dear God, thank you very much for the chance to learn more about you. You gave us the Bible, and in the Bible is precious information, and we're very grateful that we've got this information because it helps us understand the world around us and it helps us understand our lives. Help us tonight to concentrate and to learn, and so we offer this prayer with thanks in the name of our King, the King of the world, Jesus Christ. Amen. Alrighty, so our topic for tonight is literal creation. Now, the worksheet, in some ways it's for the older kids. We're not going to be going through this in order. So you kind of need to have a glance through what some of the subjects are. And once you understand what some of the subjects are, then you'll be able to sort of catch on, take notes at the right point. So some of the subjects here are: why does it matter how we view Genesis? What are some of the key principles that come out of the early chapters of Genesis? Does science require faith? Does the Bible require faith? And what about evidence? What supporting evidence is there? We want to talk about what some scientists think about God's presence. We want to understand what Genesis says about a creation. And there's a few other things. So, let's get started. First thing, a question. Our title tonight was Literal Creation. What does that mean? When we say literal creation, and that's our subject for tonight, what subject are we trying to talk about? Feel free to make a guess if you don't know. I won't mock you much. At the back, I can see Auntie Laura struggling to kind of articulate her thoughts. She knows what it means, but getting the words out is sometimes difficult for her. So if someone wants to help, that'd be great. Literal creation. What do we mean? Yeah, Seth? Actual, real-life creation. That's good enough for now. Thank you for that, Seth. All right, so actual real-life creation, we'll go into exactly what we're talking about in just a few seconds. And hopefully as we go through this, you're gonna be able to see that Seth is right and understand what we mean by literal, actual, real-life creation. But more significantly, we want to know why this subject is important, because it actually is really, really important. Because you see, Out there in the broader world, there are two key views. Now, most of you guys are at Heritage. At Heritage, those two views exist, but we're very clear that the Bible is important. But as soon as you leave Heritage, go to a non-Christian school, go to university, you're going to be exposed to two views, two worldviews. And one of them is called evolution, and fundamentally that's a godless view. It's a view of the world designed to understand everything in the world except to say that God isn't part of it. There's no such thing as God. And then at the other end, there's a view that we hold to, that there is a God and that he's a rewarder of those that faithfully seek him, and that he was involved in every aspect of creation. And between those two worldviews, there's all of these steps that people take. So, on one end, people think that creation was this accident, this unguided accidental process, where one thing accidentally led to another over millions, even billions of years, and eventually we ended up with people that could stand on their hind legs and talk with their faces. And it was all a big accident. God's not involved, and the Bible was just something that people made up to make themselves feel better at bedtime. That's what some people believe. And most of the world, sadly to say, believes this. And in between that, there's steps. So some people believe that, yes, there was evolution, but now and again, God had just kind of changed it ever so slightly, guide it, direct it a little bit. Some people believe, yes, everything was created in 6 days, but look, those 6 days aren't real 6 days. They're 6 days that last millions and millions of years, and each of those days went on for ages and ages, and on those days there was evolution. Some people believe that, look, there were 6 days, but look, God was creating everything over 6 broad periods. It wasn't that there was evolution as such, but it looks like that because God was creating so slowly. And then there's what we believe. God created everything in 6 days. And I want to tell you something that I found recently that I found really cool. It's an argument that comes from a person called Calvin. Now, Calvin was a horrible man, a horrible, horrible man, but he started a religion called the Calvinists in the 1600s. And he said, we shouldn't be questioning why didn't God take longer. The question is, why did God not take shorter? God could have created the world like that and everything in it. But he took 6 long days, and that's the question. The question isn't why didn't he take millions of years? The question is why didn't he do it quickly? All right, so back to this subject. Where do all these views come from? Well, they come from a problem that people have kind of stumbled upon in a way. People have chosen to interpret the Bible using science. So when they read the Bible, they go, does that agree with science? Oh, that doesn't agree. Miracles? Walking on water? No, that's impossible. Nobody can walk on water. Must be just a story. And so they look at scientific evidence which says in order to walk on water, you have to be behind a motorboat, moving fairly fast, holding a rope. It can't be done by any person without a speedboat. In the times of Jesus, there weren't many speedboats. Therefore, no one walked on water back then. And, of course, they're deciding what the Bible says based on what they know about science. In other words, they've made science a higher authority than the Bible. But what's worse is, who wrote the Bible? Now, this is an easy one for someone to get 50 points. Who wrote the Bible? Next. Well, yes, John was one of the writers of the Bible. That's excellent. But who told John what to write? Yes, we're going to get there eventually. Someone else want to have a go? Yes? Thank you. Easiest answer in the book, God, and you were on the right track. Next. But you see, the problem with this thinking where we say, oh, well, that can't be right because the science doesn't agree, is that it makes science a higher authority, not than just the Bible, than God, and it assumes that science has all the answers. And anybody who's ever been on a diet will tell you that science doesn't have all the answers, because one day it's the all-fat diet, and next day it's the all-salt diet, and finally it's the all-bubblegum diet, but none of them do what they're meant to do, and the science keeps moving as to which diet is best for you. Science doesn't have all the answers, but it seems so compelling. And you guys, as you grow, you're going to find this. You're going to go out to university or go out to TAFE or go out into the world doing your jobs, and people will tell you about the science, and it will sound so compelling because all of these scientists said it. And yet that means nothing, because next week they'll change their mind because the science changes, but the Bible doesn't. I want to show you what some scientists, none of them Christadelphians, had to say about science in general and their view of it. Anyone want to give me the name of a famous scientist? Yes, Albert Einstein. There you go. Here we go. Albert Einstein said, "I feel like a man chained." Now, this is the man who invented the speed of light, who first realised that it really all depends on how you look on it, came up with these ideas of frames of reference and discovered the general theory of relatives, which I think had something to do with who are your cousins and second cousins and all of that sort of thing, something to do with relatives. And so he was a real genius working out how a second cousin is connected to and all of those sorts of things. And he said, "I feel like a man chained. I get a glimpse of reality, and then it flees. If only I could be free from the shackles of my intellectual smallness, then I could understand the universe in which I live." Now, people would say this was the smartest guy in the last 100 years. And he says, "I'm too small, I can't wrap my head around everything I'm seeing out there." Here's another one. This man invented gravity. He probably got the patent on gravity first. And he said, "I am a child," it's Isaac Newton, and he said, "I am a child on the seashore, picking up a pebble here and a shell there, but the great ocean of truth still lies before me." He's basically saying science is too big for me to wrap my head around. The universe, I don't get everything that's going on out there. And again, famous scientists would say the same thing. This is Michael Faraday. He was the bright spark who discovered things like electromagnetic induction. For those of you who don't understand that, he was the first man to work out why you can't use an aluminium fry pan on the stove that Auntie Ariel and I bought. Genius, making this discovery about our stove. And he said, "The book of nature which we have read is written by the finger of God." In other words, he's saying when you look at science, it's something that God wrote, and that's why we find it so hard to get a handle on it. This is the person who invented, well, look, he was the genius who came up with really small stuff. In fact, the smallest thing ever is called the Planck constant. It's got nothing to do with planks, but anyway, and he said religion and science demand for their foundation faith in God. And we'll see why in a second. This man, Arno Penzias, he came out, actually he died just a month ago, January 22, 2024, and he was the person who discovered a thing called the background cosmic radiation, which is kind of, it seems like someone left the microwave door on in the universe, and there's all this radiation. And he discovered that, and he said, the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted if I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses. Well, this guy, Fred Hoyle, famous scientist who worked out all the chemicals that are sort of in the universe and where they maybe came from, and also some other very weird things. And he said, life cannot have a random beginning. The trouble is there are 2,000 enzymes, and the chance of obtaining them all in a random trial is about 1 in 10 to the 40,000. Now, you're thinking, what's 1 to 10 to the 40,000? That's a number I've never heard of before. Well, it's if you imagine a 10 with 40,000 zeros behind it, so it's not 10 million or 10 billion or 10 gazillion or 10 trillion gazillion triceratops, Tyrannosaurus rexazillion, it's bigger than those. It's got 40,000 zeros after it. He says an outrageously small possibility that could not be faced even if the whole universe was just the ingredients required to make that life. C.S. Lewis, not a scientist, a philosopher, said this, and by the way, he's the guy who invented wardrobes. Men became scientific because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a legislator. Now, this one is perhaps the most important one we've read so far. I want someone to tell me what they think it means. Do I have a volunteer? Yeah, C.A.
The first people who thought that you could look at the world from a scientific point of view, well, had to make the assumption that there was a lawful way that things are set out, and so therefore you could actually find those laws and then understand the whole universe from small examples of it.
Exactly. So this is a really important sentence, and I want to say it and explain it again. This man, C.S. Lewis, is saying something really powerful. He's saying to be a scientist and make scientific discoveries like wardrobes and those sorts of things, what you have to do is you have to believe that the universe makes sense. In other words, you have to believe that there's a reason things happen, a law behind them. If I drop this cup, it will fall to the ground rather than turning into a fridge magnet and hovering. Turn into a fridge magnet and hover, makes no sense. Falls to the ground and shatters, makes perfect sense because there's a law. And so when scientists first began looking at the universe, they said, well, in everything we look at, we think there must be a law that explains what's going on there. In other words, the universe follows rules. It's no good looking at the universe and expecting to understand it unless it does follow rules. And then all you're looking at is, what are those rules and why does it follow it? And they did that because they believed that the universe had rules, and to believe that the universe has rules, you've got to believe that someone made those rules. There's rules for the universe, not just for us tidying our bedrooms on a Saturday morning. And so C.S. Lewis is telling us that in order to be a scientist, you have to have faith that the universe makes sense. Now, this does relate to literal creation. We'll get there. So the story of creation is in the book of Genesis. And Genesis and the story of creation is really important. I found this cartoon because I thought it really captured the idea for me of why it's so important. You see, the book of Genesis is the foundation of the whole Bible. And it's so important that we understand what's in Genesis and that it makes sense to us, because if Genesis is just a story, it's just kind of like a parable or a myth, and there's no reality to it, and we can't really trust it, which is what some people say, well then how can we trust anything else in the Bible? Without an appreciation of the lessons embedded in the creation story, the rest of the Bible is just kind of a bit pointless. And I'm going to show you now a slide of the biblical lessons in Genesis 1. So somebody tell me what's in Genesis 1. What's Genesis 1 about? Say it loudly. Creation, right? The 6 days of creation, finishing with on the 7th day God rested. Here's the lessons I find in just the story of creation. I learn in that story, if I had nothing else, imagine somebody said, here's the Bible, and they tore out Genesis chapter 1, and they said, there's the whole Bible. There's nothing else. You've just got Genesis chapter 1. Everything you've got of the Bible is just Genesis chapter 1. Here's what you'd learn, even if you only had one chapter. you'd learn that there was one God. Because you see, none of the other gods showed up to help God out. When God said, I'm building a universe, you didn't have, I don't know, Shiva, the god of the Indians, showing up with his elephant trunk to help God, because he doesn't exist. There was only one God capable of making the universe. And we're told that God existed before the beginning. Remember, it said, in the beginning, God created, which means that God had to be there before the beginning. In other words, he's eternal. Romans says this, that from the creation we learn amazing things about God, including his eternal power and divine nature. We learn in Genesis chapter 1, obviously, that God is the creator, that everything came from God. And he made it all. We learn that God values good. Remember, he said in the beginning, God made light, and God said, the light is good. He likes good things. He values them. And that goodness came from God because he made all the good things. From what? From nothing? No, from the only thing that existed, which was him. He was the only thing there. And we learn that we are made by him and in his image. In other words, we owe everything to him. So there's some lessons we learn from Genesis chapter 1. If you just had that, you'd learn these things. And what that shows us is how important the early chapters of Genesis are. If we don't have them, and if we believe that it's just a story, well, then the rest of the Bible is untrustworthy. So as we said, anybody who looks at the universe and at science has to believe there's faith. Has to have faith. Again, this is Albert Einstein, and we won't go through it in detail, but Albert Einstein says that every scientist must have faith. Now, Albert Einstein did not believe in our God. He didn't even really believe in a God as we understand it at all. He kind of believed in a funny way that the whole universe was God, which is wrong. But he believed in God nonetheless. He believed that the whole universe was ordered and made sense, and therefore it was, in a sense, God-like. He believed that in order to be a scientist, in order to spend one's whole life trying to discover the laws that govern our universe, you have to have faith that those laws exist in the first place. You have to have faith. And the reason I'm labouring this point is sometimes you guys are going to encounter someone who says to you, oh, you believe in the Bible, you've got faith. I believe in science. Science is better than faith. Anyone who goes to university is going to encounter this in the first year, probably in the first few weeks. Someone will tell them that science trumps faith. Here's the smartest scientist in the last 100 years saying you can't be a scientist if you don't have faith. Believe in something you've got no proof for. What's the thing they've got no proof for? That the universe makes sense, but if you don't believe that, you can't be a scientist. Every scientist has to believe in something they can't prove. And that's really important. So when someone says to you, faith or science, you don't say, you say, hold it just a minute, both need faith. That's really, really important. And so to believe in the story of Genesis, you need faith. And to believe in science, you need faith. Both require a sort of faith. Science and faith are not opposites. What we ought to be doing when we come to scientific subjects to do with the Bible, we validate, we make our decision about what's right and wrong, we validate the science using the Bible. When the science agrees with the Bible, we accept the science. When the science disagrees with the Bible, we wait, because it'll change sooner or later. All right, so into the Bible. This is a list of quotes from the New Testament that shows a bunch of people in the New Testament who all believe in creation. So Luke, believed in creation. He wrote about Adam. Paul believed in creation. He wrote about God who commanded the light. The author of Hebrews believed in creation. He said that that in the beginning God laid the foundations of the earth. So many of the authors of the Bible believed in creation. Here's what Jesus had to say. Jesus talked about the creation of man and woman. And he talked about how from the beginning of the creation, God created until this time, there'll be certain things in place. He clearly believed in creation. So here's the big question. And you don't need to answer this, although if you'd like to for 50 points, you can. Did Luke, the author of the Hebrews, Paul, the Apostle Peter, did they get it wrong? Did the Lord Jesus Christ get it wrong? Was Jesus just a bit ignorant of all the scientific facts? Did Jesus just kind of think, oh, yeah, it's true, when really Genesis and the story of creation is a myth? What do we think? Anyone want 50 points for free? Yes, Austin? No! Excellent, thank you. Well done, 50 points. You can spend them at the imaginary myth shop later on. All right. So Jesus was not too scientifically ignorant to understand what was going on, and we're smarter. That's not what was happening here. Genesis 1 is not just a way of trying to simplify a very scientific way to people who didn't have the understanding. That's not what's going on here. Have a look at this. These are passages, this is not by no means all the passages, but these are passages in the Old Testament that explicitly talk about the Old Testament, explicitly talk about the creation. Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Kings, Chronicles, Nehemiah, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jonah, Amos, Zechariah, Malachi, all explicitly reference the creation. They all believed in creation. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians, Colossians, Timothy, Hebrews, James, Peter, and Revelation all explicitly talk about the creation, with the exception of John. It's implied. Here's people who we know believed in the creation. Job, Moses, David, Ethan, Hiram, Hannah, Jonah, Hezekiah, Isaiah. I've just realised I missed Solomon here. Hosea, Amos, Jeremiah, Zechariah, Malachi, Nehemiah, Lord Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Peter, John, Stephen, Paul, and the author of Hebrews. So many of the people in the Bible who were not idiots, Solomon included, believed in the creation. But here's the real reason why we should believe in creation and the creation story as it's written. This is what I think is the most powerful reason to believe in a literal creation. Because God said. God was the one who told Moses what to write down. And God said to Moses, write down that I made everything in 6 days. This is perhaps the strongest feature in Genesis chapter 1. It really stands out when you look at Genesis chapter 1. God says again, I said. In the beginning, the earth was without form and void. The Spirit of God was on the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. God said, let there be a firmament. God said, let the earth be divided from the seas. On and on it goes. God said. God said he did it this way. And if he says he did it this way, he did it this way. We might not know how God did it or the intricate details, but this is the way he did it. And here's another really important point. When people talk about ancient things, really ancient things, and they talk about dinosaurs and paleontography and geography, and they say, well, what we've got to do here, because there was no witness to these events, what we do is we look at them, we observe them, and we make interpretations about these events. Oh, look, there's a fossil. It's a fossil of a dinosaur, and it's layered between this Cambrian stone and this other stone, and because it's there, we can interpret this to work stuff out. Because there's no witness who can tell us what happened here. But there was. there was a witness who could tell us what happened here. They're interpreting the results and trying to work out what happened because they don't have a witness. If there was a video footage of what happened then, we'd all know, wouldn't we? If there was somebody who was still alive who'd watched these events, we could work out and we could say to them, so you were there? Was it evolution or creation? And they say, oh, there was no one there, but there was someone there. And that one person is the person we're already talking about. God! God was there, and he said there was a witness to all of these events. The geology, all of the laying down of the strata of the stone, that particular dinosaur bone that just happens to be there beside human footprints. God saw that happen. And he wrote down an eyewitness account, or at least made sure that Moses did. There was a witness to creation. And he ensured that his witness account was recorded and preserved in Moses' writings. And so it follows that because we do have a witness, we ought to let the witness tell us what happened rather than decide for ourselves. Okay, but some people then look at Genesis chapter 1 and the 6 days of creation and they say, well, it's still not clear. And there's a reason it's not clear. You see, there's actually a wide variety of ways you could read it. You know how in the story of Genesis it says, on the first day this happened, and on the second day this happened, and on the third day that happened, right? Well, the funny thing is, in the story of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, there are actually 4 different types of days. Firstly, there's a day that lasts for 24 hours. Because he says the evening and the morning were the first day. That's 24 hours, right? Evening plus morning, 24 hours. That's a day. But he also says he called the light day and the darkness night. How long is that day? Hold it, I'll cover it so you can't... Is that, oh, no, okay. So how long, if the day is light and the night is darkness, how long is the day? For those of you who can't read. Anyone? Yeah, Austin. 12 hours, right? And then at the end of the story, he says, these are the generations of everything I made, from the heaven and the stars and the moon and all the way through to the animals and the plants. This is in the day that I made them. And you think, hold on, he didn't make them on a day, he made them in 6 days. But he describes the 6 days of creation as one day. So there you've got a day that lasts 6 days. And then he says, on the 7th day, I rested. And that's a symbolic thing in a way. Because when we come through to Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews tells us that that represents the kingdom age. The rest that God has given to believers. And so the 7th day is a symbol of 1,000 years, which is something that Peter picks up. And so there are 4 different days in in Genesis that we could pick from. We say, well, 6 days, but how long were those days? Were those days 12 hours, 24 hours, 6 days, 1,000 years long? And some people love the idea that each of these days lasted for 1,000 years. 6 1,000-year days. Now, you might think, that's really weird. Why would Genesis have all these different days? But in English, we have the same thing. Here's a sentence. I quite like this. In my grandfather's day, it took over 6 days to drive across the Nullarbor, driving only during the day. Now that's one sentence in English with 3 different days. Did you see that? Because, you see, my grandfather's day doesn't mean he had one day. My grandfather's day was January the 31st, 1904. It's not like that. When you say my day, you mean my life. So my grandfather's day speaks about in my grandfather's life. It took over 6 days of 24 hours to drive across the Nullarbor, driving only during the daylight hours. We know what that means. The context helps us understand. And the weird thing is, apparently, English has got over 10 different ways you can use the word day. Hebrew's got 6. But the context tells you. And we'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. But in that sentence, we're not confused about what day means. And a Hebrew wouldn't be confused in Genesis, and I'll show you why as we go on. But there's another thing going on here. You see, it says in the first day, and the second day, and the third day, and the fourth day, and the fifth day. Yeah, go for it. I can go back a slide, please. Now, is it because you missed something? Yep, okay. I'll talk more slowly then. How do you like the pictures? I went for very different style of pictures this time. Yeah, Baruch. He liked cupcakes. Didn't you know that?
I was reading my skateboard.
It's very hard to get original photos and paintings of people from those times. Sorry? Faraday? I think he might have had a fidget spinner, yes. No, that was Max Planck who had a Nintendo. Famous Nintendo player. Alrighty. And one of them had some French fries and the last one had I think he had a Transformer. Alright. So, the fifth day. So what are we talking about here? So in Genesis chapter 1, it says the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day. And we're wondering, how long are these days? Did they last 1,000,000 days? Did they last one day? Now, I know you all know that the days of creation last 24 hours. But I want you to understand why we know they last 24 hours. So the first thing is, yes, Hebrew has lots of different ways that you can read the word day. But even in English, context helps you know which one it is. And we'll come back to that. But see, also in Genesis chapter 1, the days are numbered. First day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day. And there's a funny thing that happens in the Bible. There are 2,295 times in the Old Testament that word day is used. Over 1,000 times, out of those 2,295 times that the word day is used, there's a number associated with the day. For example, it says, and on the 5th day, or on the 26th day, on the 17th day. Now, here's the thing that happens. Every time there's a number associated with a day, without any exception in the whole Bible, it's always a 24-hour day. Always. And we're going to look at the 5th day because there just happens to be only 3 examples of that. So I thought it wouldn't take us very long. So, Zion, could you please look up for me Numbers chapter 7, verse 36. Who else has got a Bible? Yes, good. Can you look up Numbers 29, verse 26? And Seth, you've got Judges 19, verse 8. Whoever gets there first, tell us what your verse is and read it out. Yours was Numbers 29, 26. Go, nice and loud. So, on the 5th day, she did something that involved talking to some people. Is there anything in that verse that would suggest that that day lasts for, 1,000 years? On the 5th day, as she was being buried, there's nothing there. That day, there's no reason to assume that that day is anything other than a 24-hour day. Yes?
And on the 5th day, Naphtali 2 rams and 14 lambs of the first year without spot.
Excellent. And by the way, it's going to go on and say on the 6th day and on the 7th day, presumably those days follow the 5th day, right? That's what makes sense. You don't sort of have the 5th day 5 weeks after the 4th day. It's a 24-hour day. Yes, Seth?
And he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, Comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried till afternoon, and then eat both of them.
There you go. So here's a day, it's got a morning and an afternoon and then a 10,000 year... No, it doesn't have a 10,000 year evening. It's a normal day with a morning. There's no reason to assume that day is anything other than 24 hours. And every time that a day is numbered in the Bible, there's no reason to assume it's anything other than 24 hours because the context gives us a clear guide. But here, I think, is the real clincher. Here's what God did. He went to the children of Israel and he said, here's how we're going to structure your lives. The 7th day of your week will be the Sabbath. Don't do any work. Not you, your son, your daughter, your maidservant, your cattle. Don't even let your cows work. Nor the stranger in your gates. For in 6 days God made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. And then he rested on the 7th day, so you rest on the 7th day too. Now, can you imagine what would happen if God said, all right, well, on the 1st through to the 6th day, I made everything. And then on the 7th day, we're going to make that 1,000 years. So you have 6 days of work and then 1,000 days of doing nothing. they'd starve. They'd run out of money, wouldn't they? It wouldn't make any sense. You see, their week was based upon a week. The creation took 1 week. And here's a really strange thing. Have a look at this. This slide took me longer than all the rest put together, just about. All right. God, when he made the things in the heavens, he says that the sun, the moon, and stars were for days, for seasons, for years, and for months. Now, a day is based on the earth spinning on its axis 360 degrees so that the bit facing the sun ends up facing the sun again. That's what a day is. And we know it's a day because the sun came up again. If the sun hasn't yet come up, a day isn't done. A season is based on our rotations around the sun and the angle of the earth where we live relative to the sun. It's relative to the sun. The sun controls our seasons. A year requires 1 full orbit of the sun. A month is roughly 1 orbit of the moon around the earth. And we see it because the sun shines upon the moon. They're all controlled one way or another by the sun. But the week's not. There's no astronomical basis for the week at all. No reason for it. Why 7 days? Why not go metric and make it 10 days? Easier to count, but there's 7. The only reason our week has 7 days is because that's how long it took God to create everything. Because it's not based on any of the other things. It's not got an astronomical basis. And so, yes, there are multiple definitions of a day in Genesis chapter 1, but God leaves us in no doubt whatsoever. We don't even need to trust context to tell us how long a day is in Genesis chapter 1. Let me read. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 5. And the evening, 12 hours, and the morning were the first day. Day 2, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Day 3, verse 13, and the evening and the morning were the third day. Day 4, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Day 5, and the evening and the morning were the fifth day. He leaves us in no doubt. And day 6, the evening and the morning were the sixth day. We know exactly how long every one of those days are because he tells us. They're 24 hours and they've got an evening and a morning. We don't even need context to help us out in this case. And so we know that the days of creation didn't take millions of years. Could they? And by the way, there's a couple of other reasons. We'll go over these really quick before we finish, why each day wasn't a million years. And here's why. Jesus said, the blood of all the prophets which is shed from the foundation of the world will be required of this generation. So at this point in time, Jesus is really angry with the people he's talking to. And he says, look, you guys are going to be responsible for all the blood of the faithful people who've died. And he says, we'll go all the way from Zacharias, who died not that long ago, all the way back to Abel. And you'll be made to pay for their blood. Back to the first person who ever got murdered. You have to pay for the whole lot. Have a think about it. If a creation day was millions of years long, and during that period humanity evolved, and finally along came Adam, and then stuff started happening in the Bible story, do you really think that Cain would have been the first murderer? If evolution actually happened, either a biblical evolution, which is rubbish, or non-biblical evolution, which is a scientific falsehood, if either of those were true, is it even possible for a heart's beat that Abel would have been the first person ever to have been murdered? But he wasn't, if you believe in evolution, which means Christ is wrong, which got to be impossible. And here's another one for you. I hope you like this image. It took me a while to sort of try and get an iPhone together with a dinosaur fossil. The Apostle Paul says, as by one man, sin... Who's that one man who brought sin into the world? Anyone know? Adam. So as by Adam, sin came into the world and death by sin. Now, let me tell you what evolution is. Evolution is a theory based on a thing called the survival of the fittest. In order for survival of the fittest to work, the weakest must die. If you have millions of years of evolution until mankind finally stands on his hind paws and talks with his face, you've got a lot of people dying before Adam. And yet Jesus said that it was Adam who introduced death. If we believe any form of evolutionary idea, no matter what it is, we're agreeing that Jesus is wrong and that Adam did not be the first to sin and the first to introduce death. All right. Anyone got any questions or any comments? Uncle Kim, I know, has got lots of questions. Anyone else got something they want to ask? Yeah, go for it. Great question. So, who was the witness of creation? In fact, Arnie Ariel reminded me that there was more than one, but only one had any involvement in writing a book. But there were more than one witness of creation who are still alive today. So, anyone else? Austin, who was the first one? God was the witness. He was there and he's still alive, and what's more, he's a published author. This is his book. And so he made sure that Moses interviewed him and wrote down what God saw. So there was a witness to creation. We don't have to interpret. Someone was there. But who else was there? Yes. Angels were present. The angels were there. The sons of God sang at creation. Excellent. All right. Anything that you feel we haven't answered in our worksheet? For those of you who have been dutiful, like the ladies up front, yes, go, Rel. The Hebrews quote for 1,000 years. I will just go and grab that. No problem. Here it is. So the Hebrews quote doesn't actually mention 1,000 years. What it talks about is God's rest that he has reserved for the believers. Now we call that rest the kingdom. The rest that God has reserved for believers, that in Hebrews is likened unto the seventh day rest that God had, is called the kingdom. Now how long does the kingdom last? Anyone? Yes, Thatcher. Forever? Yes, a very good answer. And also for another numbered period of time, Austin. 1,000 years. So when we talk about the rest, it lasts 1,000 years. And here in Hebrews, God says, the seventh day is like my 1,000-day rest. Which, by the way, isn't a piece of thinking I use. We don't need to say that a day lasts for 1,000 years in the context of Genesis chapter 1, because we know that each of those days lasts just 24 hours. Okay. Any questions? Jake, I know you're full of things that you want to take back to school tomorrow. What else would you like to know? Where are the weaknesses in this argument that we need to unravel and unpack? That's cruel of me putting you on the spot. So I'll unput you on the spot and you can interrupt if you want. Yes?
I just want to challenge your second Adam's advocate.
Yes.
Statement that if theistic evolution was a thing, or evolution for that matter, then Adam would have been the first person to have sinned. However, Adam's the first time God gave a command. So therefore, if God hadn't given a command, it would have been sin.
No, you're absolutely right, but he also says it was the first time that death. But that is a good observation. So it's worth, young people, you all knowing that the reason we have done this subject and laboured it is for two reasons. The first reason is that somewhere along the line, either in the workplace, in your further education, or somewhere else out on social media, you are all going to encounter the arguments of evolution. Because the world wants to believe that God was not involved in their lives. If you believe in God, you have to do something about it. So they desperately want to believe that there is no God. And if you can believe that everything happened kind of accidentally, it's almost like the whole universe is someone tripping on the doorstep and falling flat on their face. Oh, what an accident. If you can believe that, you don't need to believe in God, and that's great. And so you're going to encounter that. This is why we've explained this tonight. But secondly, and this is even sadder, there are people who are Christian but have chosen to believe that, you know what, science is more right than God. We're going to reinterpret Genesis, which clearly says the evening and the morning are the first day, the evening and the morning are the second day, in a new way, in order to be able to shoehorn evolutionary science into the Bible. It's not necessary, and it breaks Bible truth. And that's why we've covered our subject tonight. Anything else anyone wants to raise? Nope. Yes, go, Brooke. Yes. Well, that's exactly right. So in order to explain things the way we've explained it, you have to believe the Bible. But lest we forget, let's go back to our scientists. These are some of the greatest minds. Everyone would acknowledge that these are the greatest scientists in history. And I haven't by any means grabbed all of them. All of them are saying we don't quite get it. We need God's help. Now, by the way, Isaac Newton, if he wasn't a Christadelphian, he was perilously close to believing exactly the same things we do. Exactly the same things we do. Very, very close. He was the greatest mind of the age. Albert Einstein, not a believer, didn't believe in God the way we believed in God, but still believed in a higher power in the universe. Michael Faraday, God wrote science. Max Planck, the great Nintendo artist himself, you've got to have God to be a scientist. Arno Penzas, Moses could have written the scientific treatise that he wrote. Fred Hoyle, life as we know it's impossible. Got to be a God. And I could go on, I only picked a few of these, but we could have picked heaps more. I'll come to that in a second, who acknowledge, even if they refuse to believe in God, they believe that there has to be some higher power. Yeah.
Just to throw another one out there that's quite common. We don't believe the entire Bible is literal. We don't believe that there will be a literal beast with a lot of...
Correct.
Literal lady riding on her back.
Yep.
On its back, sorry. So how then when we take a lot of things that the Bible says are symbolic, how do we know that Genesis isn't also symbolic?
Very good point. So we know that Genesis isn't symbolic because almost always when something is symbolic, we are told to expect symbols. Revelation is a classic case where we're told at the start that this was a book of sign. In the book of Daniel and Zechariah, they said, I was in a dream, or I slept and I saw, or God took me in the spirit and I visualized something, as Ezekiel says. When it's sort of poetic form, the structure of the sentences is very clearly poetic, and that can be seen, and any Hebraist will be able to tell you whether there is poetry in the text you're reading. Because I've already looked at this, I can tell you that there is poetry in Genesis chapter 1. But it's only in the last bit where God talks, well actually there's two parts. It's only in the last bit where God talks about how he had created man and what he felt about that creation of man. That's a poetic form. And in verse 2, it's just a small little bit, and I think you'll like this. So this is for Phoenix, perhaps you might enjoy this. When God said the earth is without form and void, here's what the Hebrew was. Tohu bohu. The Hebrew is tohu bohu, which rhymes beautifully, and it means without form, without shape and void. Tohu bohu. So, it's not in a literary form, it's in a narrative form, which tells us that it's either historical, it's part of a book of history, it's not in a poetic structure, and we've been told nowhere that there is a mandate to view it as anything symbolic. So they are usually enough reasons, but we could probably find some more reasons if you want me to go hunting for them. Cool. Let's leave it at that. We're now at time, and Phoenix is getting scrappy. So, eyes closed, and we will close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we know you made everything, and particularly that you made us. And because we are made by you, we know that means we mean something to you. And we know that means we should feel something for you in return. Please help us to respond to you, the one who made us, and to want to understand what you made us for, and help us to love you and to walk in the ways that you wanted us to walk in, and to live a life that would make you glad. So we offer this prayer. Thank you for the time we've had. In the name of Jesus, our King. Amen.